I know, I get them when I come near that way. Ah.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to this pre-2020 Building the Engine Summit information session. We appreciate all of you joining. We're going to go ahead and get started and try to preserve as much time as possible after all of our presentations for your questions and your feedback. So today, our presenters are going to be several of our stakeholders who have been leaders in the different aspects of the Building the Engine work, including Christine Bell, Kimberly Faison, Melvin Henley, Jody Fishman-Rains, Madhavi Reddy, Erica Rowley, and Chris Ewell. I'm Maggie DeSantis. I'm the Initiative Manager for Building the Engine, and I will be facilitating the session. So we'll begin with just our basic definition and description of what Building the Engine is. We are a citywide process to strengthen all of our neighborhoods by building a coordinated, equitable system for community development in Detroit. Our theory of change is fairly straightforward. We believe that if all of Detroit's neighborhoods are going to have a future, strong community development organizations and neighborhood-based grassroots organizations are necessary to facilitate, advocate, coordinate, and intervene with many partners to build people and places in all of our neighborhoods. But for this to be possible, we need a long-term, equitable, citywide community development system for Detroit. So that's kind of our North Star guiding light. We also, in 2018, adopted a vision for our neighborhoods, and it's very, very simple. All people in every neighborhood in the city of Detroit live, work, and engage in healthy, thriving, sustainable, and inclusive communities. So how did we start? What's our history? We started in 2016 in the spring. We were organized originally by CDAD, Lawrence Tech, and Michigan Nonprofit Association. We began with a series of kitchen cabinet meetings with several of our stakeholder groups, including grassroots organizations, community development organizations, philanthropy, city government, intermediaries, CDFIs, et cetera. And in that year, we also developed a series of 7 system elements that we'll talk about a little later in the session. By 2017, we were engaging Lawrence Tech, as well as a group of national community development experts, in order to really look at both best practices in community development empirically, as well as to do an academic scan of best practices in community development across the country. We also formed an advisory council, and by 2017, there were 150 stakeholder organizations who were participating in the work. In 2018, as a result of the research, we formed several task forces in order to begin to develop project concepts to basically execute what the system elements are, and the number of stakeholder organizations continued to grow. By 2019, we had entered into our phase 3, where we started testing some of the project concepts. We formed a system capitalization task force, which has developed several recommendations for how to resource the system over time. The advisory council stepped down and was replaced by several members of the council to form a steering committee to oversee the work going forward. And we started a process that we call the CDO coverage process in order to start to look at how we could get community development support into every city council district. Starting next year and going forward, there will be a permanent collaborative oversight structure. There will be a transition into CDAD, and the system building work will be completed. So that's kind of where we started and where we are today. And a little later in the presentation, we'll talk about the next 3 years in a little more detail. So a lot of people want to know how we work and where our resources come from. And I think it's fair to say that the most important resource is really the people and the organizations that have stepped up to participate in the work. So over 250 organizations, many, many, many more individuals than that, probably twice that many, have been involved voluntarily. They participate in work groups, committees, and task forces. They have come with us to visit other cities to learn about their community development systems. They come to our forums and our summits. They are grassroots block club leaders, CDO and intermediary and CDFI executives, city and state officials, philanthropy officers, and academic staff. We also have engaged a lot of really amazing experts. So Maggie, that's me, and Lauren comprise the staff. And we bring a great deal of experience in community development. And then since 2017, there are several firms with very specific expertise that we have engaged. They have done research, they've offered advice, they've facilitated our discussions and meetings, and they've helped us design projects. There's a long list here. I won't read every name on the list, but I'll give you a couple of seconds to check out all the different firms that have been engaged. Many of them, their engagements have ended, but this gives you a sense of the wide range of local and national expertise that we have worked with. Okay, and then finally, philanthropy has fueled the work. So starting with the Kresge and the Herb Foundations and Bank of America in 2016, adding Kellogg and Ford Foundations to that group of three in 2018, and then most recently to that group, we've added the Hudson Weber Foundation. And they have been steady supporters of our work since 2016. Very much appreciate that support. So the next piece of information really is all about who's leading building the engine at this point. You heard me mention that we formed a steering committee in 2019, and I'll give you a minute to take a look at our steering committee. This is really an amazing group of very committed people and with representatives from the city of Detroit, from two foundations, from academia, from several intermediaries, and from several community development organizations. We thank them very much. They work hard. They work once a month for 3 hours, and that doesn't count all the different task forces and committees that virtually all of them are part of. Okay, so what is building the engine of community development in Detroit? What does it consist of, and what's kind of the backdrop? So we operate on the premise that there are 7 system elements for a community development system, all leading to strong, vital neighborhoods throughout the whole city, benefiting all residents. And you see them here in the shape of a wheel. You'll forgive the engine analogy, but we are the Motor City. But the name building the engine really says what it means. It says that an engine has many parts. All the parts have to work well, and they all have to work together in order for the whole system to move forward. So what does each one of these system elements mean? System governance means an aligned, coordinated, accountable system. So it means several stakeholders working together and learning how to collaborate together. System capitalization means sustainable, long-term, public and private resources for all the system elements to operate. Capacity building and certification means coordinated support leading to powerful and effective community development organizations and grassroots organizations. Education and career pathways means an equitable leadership pipeline of Detroiters for the community development sector. Neighborhood voice and advocacy means powerful, connected, multi-sector tables in every council district. Data and evaluation means actionable data to measure progress toward neighborhood vitality. And finally, city engagement means engaged, supportive city government working as partners with CDOs and GROs. So having summarized all the system elements, what we're going to do now is to go to each one of the elements, and I'll call on people to really take you through these points and offer any detail that they feel is important. So for the Neighborhood Vitality Index, which is the data and evaluation element, I'm going to ask Erica Raleigh to take over. Hey, Erica.
Hello. Good to see everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Erica Raleigh. I'm the Director of Data Driven Detroit. And together with JFM Consulting Group, we are working on the data and evaluation element, particularly as what we call the Neighborhood Vitality Index. You can see here that the goals really, let me back up for 1 second. A lot of people might not understand why data and evaluation is actually important. We need data to understand, are we making progress as a system, as a group of stakeholders who care about community development and ultimately the residents of Detroit. In order to understand, are we making progress, we need data. We need to understand where we're not making progress and along what lines are we not making progress so that we can be more strategic in terms of targeting resources and activities. And over time, accumulating enough data will let us know which programs, which CDOs, which engagement strategies, which any number of activities are actually working in particular areas and which ones need improvement. So data can be a really critical element in the system. Of course, data is in my organization's name. I obviously care about it, but I think everyone should. So the goals here for the index is really, one, we started with defining what does success look like in neighborhoods. I'm gonna go flip to this slide. There we go. And we're using social cohesion and equity as the foundational building blocks for that. We want to measure progress over time, and then we want to promote and drive collaboration using data as well. Some key features here. So this was a very much a community-driven process.
Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. I was like,
Bingo.
who is controlling this right now?
A monster ghost.
Okay. So some key features of this work so far is that, one, it's community driven, right? We have had input from stakeholders across the board for several years now in terms of, again, even the name Neighborhood Vitality was voted on by participants in this process, let alone all the different data elements that we plan to include in the index. It's also neighborhood focused. So instead of looking at a citywide picture, we will be able to dive in and look at neighborhood by neighborhood, what's working and where we can do better. It includes both primary and secondary data. So when I say that, I mean, we have a lot of available data sources that exist through administrative processes that take place all the time. So for example, building permits data. We generate data at the city every time a building permit is pulled. That lets us know, is there activity in terms of housing improvement or new housing or new commercial buildings going on? That's secondary data that's generated as part of normal day-to-day activities. Primary data, on the other hand, is something that can be more challenging and more expensive to gather, but is also incredibly valuable. So the lived experience of residents in our neighborhoods is really important to understand, and we can't always see that from those exhaust streams from administrative processes. So this will include both the secondary data and primary data that's collected from residents and from CDOs about their experiences in neighborhoods and generally how people are feeling and what their plans are for their own future based on what's occurring in their neighborhoods. This is also designed with CDOs in mind. So we wanted to put community development organizations at the center of this. The data that's generated can also be used by the city of Detroit, by philanthropy, and by others, but CDOs are the primary users here. And then this also builds on an existing data infrastructure, adds to it, and integrates it with a lot of other data that is already housed at Data Driven Detroit and other organizations, so that it has a greater chance of being a sustainable source of information for our community. You can see here on the slide that there are 5 types of indicators. So we're bundling into this index. We're going to roll in a bunch of indicators, those primary and secondary data, to come up with essentially a measure of the vitality, health, well-being, et cetera, of our neighborhoods. And within that overall index, there are 5 buckets of indicators that we're looking at. So community capacity is one, resident opportunity, neighborhood conditions, quality of life, and then equity impact is a 5th category that we've added in the last few months based on the current circumstances that we're all facing, and a lot of great feedback from our stakeholders who have been involved. We are currently in the first phase of this work. So that means that we have been engaging the very dedicated task force that has stuck with us through this for a long time now, and many other stakeholders. We have been working to make sure that we're staying coordinated and aligned with other data collection efforts that are going on in the city right now, so that, you know, Detroiters often can get researched to death. So we're trying to make sure that we coordinate with other data initiatives. And that has been quite fascinating. If anyone wants to see the results of that process, I'm happy to share it out. The methodology, we've have developed a sort of a first pass of the methodology and the tools for data collection. And then we are right now, just within the last 2 weeks, have deployed the first pilot survey to residents across 9 of the SNF neighborhoods and the Brightmoor neighborhood, to test whether the instrument is working, how it's received, how long does it take people to fill out, et cetera, and to generate some data that will let us begin testing the methods to build the index itself. The second phase will hopefully begin in 2021, and that will allow us to revise and refine based on all the information that we gather this year, and do an entire council district. So covering an entire council district in the city, that will then allow us to understand how this groups up to the neighborhood level and the district level, and prepare us for the third phase, which will be citywide implementation. So I'm gonna stop there and pass the mic if I can, and I'll try to stick around for questions.
Great, thank you, Erica. So we're gonna move to the next element. Sorry about that. I have a cat who was wreaking havoc on my mouse. I guess cats are interested in more than live mice. So, all right. So the second element is one that really, it's a project that really focuses on 2 elements, and that's city engagement and capacity building and certification. I'm going to call on Kimberly Faison from the Detroit Housing Compact to tell us more. Kim?
Thanks, Maggie. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Kimberly Faison, and I'm the director of the Community and Economic Development Department at Detroit Future City. And as Maggie said, we also bring together a group of stakeholders for the Detroit Neighborhood Housing Compact. Without getting into a lot of details about who all makes up the Housing Compact, essentially our focus with that group, and it's all sectors participate, and the focus of that group is really about what it means to bring homes back into productive use, what it means to start tackling issues of housing quality and housing affordability. And there's a focus on, there's a group that focuses on issues of around rental stability, and another that focuses on home ownership, which includes pathways to becoming a homeowner. And so I'm here to share with you a project that we were brought on to support by Building the Engine of Community Development in Detroit. That has a specific focus on creating homeownership opportunities. Right now, we're calling it a pilot project. It does not have a name yet, but the focus is on acquisition, rehab, and resale, in which community development organizations are developers in their respective neighborhoods and working collectively to do so. We were hired by Building the Engine of Community Development in Detroit to develop the pilot project and then to deliver a report. The development of the project consisted of an engagement process with the participating community development organizations, the land bank, and others who co-created the principles and values that shaped the pilot with the objective of advancing neighborhood stabilization through the rehab projects and creating equitable homeownership opportunities that could include buyers at the 50% area median income. And I would say that it's not exclusive to 50% area median income, but we wanted to develop something that would allow for access for buyers at that income level. The project was also designed with the expressed intention of demonstrating partnerships between city government and the community development sector, as well as leveraging the knowledge and skills amongst the partners and within the ecosystem to develop capacity and skills at the partner table. Our report has two main features. The first is a description of the systems level elements that impact how mission-driven organizations go about doing single-family housing development projects. And that includes things like developer financing, home buyer counseling and down payment assistance, contractor selection and management, and generally construction management for these kinds of projects. The other component of it, of the report, is basically setting forth a project model that we recommended in which the community development organizations who would be the developers would work as a cohort and that they would be convened by us at Detroit Future City. The project will consist of capacity building to support the community development organizations and their success in obtaining project financing, managing construction, and attracting buyers, as well as other areas of support. It will also include the development of a financing pool of funding that the CDOs would tap into to do their projects. DFC will serve as the lead, continue serving as the lead convener. We will also be doing all of the pre-development activities, which can include things like fundraising for both the capacity building and the financing, and also things like research to support the areas of capacity building, and there are a number of them. We will be applying for public, private, and philanthropic funding, and that will be ongoing through next year. We're currently wrapping up our research on cohort development and management, which included a series of interviews with the participating organizations, philanthropic funders, community development finance institutions, and public sector leaders. And that provided us some insights about the organizational needs and underwriting considerations, but also the importance of this work at a systems level and the opportunity to be a positive disruption in order to affect change. Overall, the project aims for the cohort to work collectively in acquiring, rehabbing, and selling 70 homes to low and moderate income families across 8 neighborhoods. The capacity building is to ensure that the organizations have the ability to successfully obtain financing, manage the construction, and attract buyers. The partnership includes 8 community development organizations, the land bank, the city, SENAIR, and others, and will eventually include additional consultants, contractors, and other resource partners as the project expands in its reach. We hope that the learning and evaluation that is built into it will allow us to not only measure impact at the organization and neighborhood levels, but also to determine how we can become better at systematizing how we engage the entire, as much of the ecosystem as we can, and to innovate better and faster in the future. So I'm going to pause there. I wasn't sure if the Q&A was now or later, so I'm going to stop there.
Kim, I'm going to jump in and ask you to elaborate a little bit on the point about the city's investment.
So we are currently in conversation with the city to develop a process by which we can apply for, we and partners can apply for CDBG dollars. I won't go too in depth only because we are not at the point where we have applied for the funding yet, and there will be a number of approvals that have to happen in order for that money to be formally committed. But the fact that they have been willing to work with us as much as they have, I mean, for months now, we have been in communication with a number of departments in the city to even get us to a point where they would consider supporting our application process. And they have been willing to commit their staff time to help us understand all of the regulatory processes that will apply to both the capacity building portion as well as the project financing. And I mean, it's been a tremendous opportunity just to spend that time with them, because then they're also giving us insights about, you know, what their underwriting criteria will be, how it aligns with, you know, the bridge lender that will be involved, and, you know, just trying to make sure that we are doing as much work as a table so that the community development organizations don't have to do as much of that research. We want to be able to kind of bring a packaged program that this community development organizations can kind of easily move into. And it's our role to kind of support all the things that they'll need to be successful. I'm going to pause there because I don't know how much time we have, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what you wanted me to hit on, Maggie.
Oh, that's fine. And you're still under 10 minutes, so we're good. So thanks,
Okay.
Kim. I'm sure there'll be questions. I can see that one question in the chat is how people can get the full report. And I can tell you that it's attached to the buildingtheengine.com website under our findings. But Kim, can you also give the web address or the access to the report to
Sure.
everyone that's listening?
Sure. And if I'm not sure if I should do that now, or if it's okay to wait to see if there's any other questions
Sure.
I should answer and then do it. So I will add that in the chat.
Okay.
But for people who are interested in this topic, we also recently released another report called Rebuilding Home, which is a set of case studies that focuses on organizations in Detroit who have done single family acquisition, rehab, resale programs in their respective neighborhoods. And it provides a deep dive into how their programming was developed, some of the objectives they were trying to attain, what some of the successes and pitfalls look like, gives some cost data. But that really, I think, is beneficial for not only us, but also for some of the entities who we're trying to develop partnerships with, to see that, I mean, it costs more. You really need to be able to put more money into a project than you might expect out of it in order to achieve the equitable opportunities for, home ownership. But I think it also demonstrates that that you really can do this work when you build it, taking into consideration all of the pieces, and also ensuring that the development of the overall project is focusing on those end buyers and the neighborhood stabilization goals that you're trying to achieve. But it takes a lot of partnerships and a lot of pre-development in order to make it happen. But I really do believe that in doing it this way, and then also like our dedication to producing materials to teach along the way, that we've been able to do with the housing compact, we present to them on our findings as they come about. But our hope, I think, is that there is a leave behind, so that as many organizations that have the ability and the desire to do this, that we leave behind information about how to build this kind of work, the kinds of capacities and skills that it takes, the kinds of partnerships that are required. Yeah, so it's a labor of love. I will tell you that.
All right, Kim, you have gone past the 10 minutes, so we're going to move on now. But if you could,
Okay.
if you could put your website or the link to the reports, the two
Yeah.
reports in the chat, that would be great.
I
I'm
will.
just I'm gonna encourage everyone we're gonna go through this if it's okay, but we're watching your questions and we will try to address each one after we get done with the presentation. All right, and one of the questions was also whether we would share this slide deck, and of course we will. Every one of you who's signed on to this session will receive it. We'll probably attach it to our website as well. All right, the next element is the capacity building and certification. And in order to hear about that project, I'm going to call on Madhavi Reddy from BECDD.
Hi, everyone. As I said, I'm Madhavi Reddy from BECDD, the Community Development Advocates of Detroit. I'm going to talk to you today about some work we're doing with some of our favorite partners in Detroit around the community development capacity building delivery system. A little bit of a mouthful there, but let me start by talking about some of the partners in the work that BECDD is working with. We're working with COACT, Enterprise, Michigan Community Resources, and Michigan Nonprofit Association. And all of us are organizations that provide support to other organizations, big or small. So we're working together to figure out what is the best way to develop some coordinated capacity building services. Now, before I sort of get into it, I want to acknowledge that capacity building is one of those terms that you can find people talk about. What does that mean anyway for days on end? But I thought I would just frame the rest of what I'm about to say that all of the partners and everyone around building the engine sees capacity building as building on, organizational assets, whether you're a CDO or your community development organization, a block club, or an individual resident doing really amazing things in your neighborhood. We're not framing this as people not knowing what they're doing or any of those terrible things we hear a lot about. We're really framing this as supporting the really good and amazing and very important work that's happening in neighborhoods across the city. And we're framing it as a way to make sure that people have the tools and things that they need to do all the good work that they want and they know needs to happen in their neighborhoods. And that we also really believe very firmly that the center of all of this work, and Maggie sort of talked about a bit earlier in building the engine's commitments to equitable development, but really centering the idea and the notion and the hard work around racial equity and how that shows up in the capacity building world is to make sure that we're providing opportunities for organizations that sometimes get left behind or are the ones that are really talked about as not having enough capacity to be really at the center of all of the work we're trying to do. So that's just a little bit of framing. And so the goals for this are really to be able to have some, predictable capacity building supports for groups in Detroit working in Detroit's neighborhoods, leading ultimately to sort of capable and effective community development organizations and neighborhood-based grassroots groups such as block clubs and neighborhood associations. Detroit is unique in many ways in that those sort of smaller, less formal groups do the work of giants. So we wanted to make sure to include them in all of this sort of capacity building work. And really, what we wanted to do was work together to address some of the things we've heard for many, many years about what's not going well with capacity building, and that there are so many options. It's a bit difficult to figure out who to go to for what. There's some question about sort of the quality of what's out there, and there are still a lot of gaps around, what sort of organizations need. So all of us as partners are working together to try to figure out a very streamlined way that people can access the capacity building services that are offered in the city. Trying to, as I said, address some of those issues that we've heard about for the past, couple of years about how it probably, I've heard somebody say that it takes almost as much time to figure out where to go to for help as it does to actually get the help. So we want to make sure we're not recreating some of those kinds of habits. And that, really acknowledging that for it to be comprehensive, we have to acknowledge that particularly CDOs are also nonprofits. And so there's these sort of general nonprofit supports that need to be provided and people need to have access to. And those are things like, board development, hiring, accounting practices. But then there is this very specialized arena of services that are related to community development. You heard Kim talk a lot about some of those things around like housing rehab. There are sort of similar TA technical assistance needs around land reclamation, engaging the community planning. So trying to make sure that it's a very streamlined process between accessing sort of general nonprofit supports and those very technical and very specific, sometimes community development services. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that all the partners are working together, and we're trying to sort of clearly define our roles with the ultimate purpose of just making a system that's very easy and as streamlined as possible for users to go through, and that really is useful for the users. And we also want to build in this whole idea of sort of accountability to make sure there's some choice of who people get to work with. We don't want to say, X organization, you need to work with this person or that person. Like trying to make sure there's some choice and to make maintaining people's agency as they try to go through the system. And as I said earlier, just to provide the right sort of cadence and balance of supports for, community development organizations who are nonprofits, grassroots organizations who may not be nonprofits or sort of on the cusp of deciding whether they want to stay informal or become more formal, and, finding the right services for all of the, hundreds of thousands of Detroit residents who do amazing things in their neighborhood, and make sure they have access to what they need to continue to sort of do that good work. So I'll just end by saying it's, in order to get this to be right and streamlined, we're taking a little bit of time, and we're sort of in the middle end process of defining roles and workflow and sort of budgets for what and how much something like this might cost.
Great. Thank you, Madhavi. I'm going to ask you to stay stay right here, because we're going to go to your next project, CDAD's next project. So the next element is neighborhood voice and advocacy. And I'll ask Madhavi to talk about CDAD's work with the pilot project.
Thank you. I think the beginning of this project would fall in the second circle. Maggie had those phases of building the engine earlier. I think this would have fallen in the beginning of this would have been fallen in that second circle, where, we worked with the Vision and Values Task Force, which was a very dynamic group of folks working in community development, to really figure out what could a neighborhood voice and advocacy framework look like? What would it look like to have a system or a framework for building up neighborhood voice, and how do we, expand that sort of citywide? And CDAD was brought on to sort of develop the framework with the Vision and Values Task Force. And I was the person that was working on that. So here I am, I'm talking to you 2 times in a row. And this framework is really based on, a lot of research, a lot of, personal experience doing this kind of work. So just wanted to say that the idea sort of came from many, many different places. So the main idea of behind the neighborhood voice and advocacy framework is that there is power in people working together, and there's absolute necessity to, center resident voice in all of this sort of work. And so what we're thinking is, and we did, Maggie mentioned 2 pilots. We did do 2 pilots in 2019 to sort of gauge some lessons learned around this work. And the idea is that at the neighborhood level, we would work with communities who are interested in working this way to put together a partnership table, a planning table, whatever people wanted to call it, that would be really designed to support the vision of residents for their community. So these spaces would bring together, residents, community development organizations, nonprofits, city, all of these people across different sectors who could support the vision of a neighborhood and work together to really figure out a way to support the neighborhood's vision for what they want for their community. We looked at several models and we settled on something called the connected communities approach. It was developed by a neighborhood in Toronto. It was developed with the residents in the neighborhood. And this place is probably one of the most sort of diverse neighborhoods in the world. And we had some folks from the Center for Connected Communities come to talk to some of the CDOs and the partnership around that Vision and Values Task Force a couple of years ago before we engaged in these pilots. And so the idea of getting together at the neighborhood level is really to demonstrate sort of the power of residents, the power of partnership, to do things, building really strong place-based networks at the neighborhood and block level. I think, one of the millions of things we've learned during this pandemic is that there's real necessity to do work at the block level. And that's sort of what the CDOs do and the block clubs do, is those are the people who know everyone at the sort of block level. So to do some like network weaving, maybe place-based emergency planning. This was all developed before COVID-19. So, now we're talking to people about resilient communities. What does it look like to build a resilient communities? How do we make sure that those of us who do this as work are doing this to support the vision of residents at the local level? And, really connecting it to sort of inclusive neighborhood planning. So basically bringing together a lot of partners at the neighborhood level to support the vision of residents. And the idea is that there would be these neighborhood tables in neighborhoods across the city. We're hoping for a pilot we're hoping to do 3 new neighborhoods in 2021. But what we're hoping for is a city-wide network of these neighborhood-based networks who could then, be convened citywide to develop a neighborhood, like a neighborhoods-based policy agenda, who could sort of talk about issues arising in neighborhoods where there's sort of themes and opportunities for partnerships for organizations and for neighborhoods in different parts of the city to sort of work together. And I just wanted to end with, I think one of the most important lessons we learned in doing this work is that it is difficult to really convince people to sort of believe in the process. It's hard for people to work in this way, particularly if you're someone who's used to being in a position of power. It's hard to sort of work together with residents, and it takes a lot of real time to sort of build those kinds of trusting relationships that you need to build a shared vision at the neighborhood level. And then I wanted to talk about, I want to give you an example from some of my previous work. I've done this in a neighborhood in another city. And one of the things we were working on was emergency preparedness. And obviously this was like pre-pandemic and no one predicted where we would be right now. But what we had was a neighborhood full of sort of high-rise towers. And the housing stock was a bit old, and there was some worry that something could happen. So we did some emergency preparedness planning together. Everybody had sort of sketched out roles of what we would do in case something happened in the neighborhood. And at like 2 o'clock in the morning, a boiler exploded in a high-rise tower and there had to be an evacuation, but we were organized and sort of knew what to do. And I've been thinking about that kind of organization and emergency preparedness and what that could look like in neighborhoods while we're sort of recovering from this this pandemic and the long-term sort of ramifications, and how there's like heightened need to sort of plan at that neighborhood level for things like emergencies, but also, you know, everyday things like sort of neighborhood-based safety strategies. Are there local workforce development things we can think about? So I think there's just a lot of opportunity, though we did design this pre-pandemic, that the idea and the power of working together to support the vision of residents and then connecting those neighborhoods across the city still seems quite powerful, and maybe a little bit more urgent than we felt in 2017 or 2018. I'm not sure if I should go that far to say that, but to me, certainly in all the conversations I've been, it seems a bit more urgent to get to that work.
Great, thank you, Madhavi.
Thank you.
You're going to get a break and then we're going to bring you back. So next, we're going to talk about the education and career pipeline element. And to talk about all the work there, I'm going to call on Christine Bell from Urban Neighborhood Initiatives. Christine, are you muted? All right, so we're gonna, Christine, it could be that
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Yep.
Great. It's been a 2020 kind of week. My computer has been danced on by my youngest child, and that was over the weekend. It broke, and then she also spilled tea on it this morning, so now it's really broken. So I'm using different technology. So I apologize for that. So you also might hear some background noise as well, because I have 3 little ones here with me. I'm Christine Bell. I'm the Executive Director of Urban Neighborhood Initiatives, and I'm one of 4 community development organizations that have been leading the work, really helping to build out the community development leadership pipeline. So the other organizations that are working on this collectively is Congress of Communities, East Side Community Network, and the Cody Rouge Community Action Alliance. And part of the reason why the 4 of us are doing this work together is because we all have done a lot of really good work with young people as it relates to community development. So our goals have really been to develop a community development career pathway for young people. We decided really early on that we wanted to start as young as middle school, partly because many of us have middle schoolers that have done work with our individual organizations around community development. And so we start there really with exposure and move through high school and then through post-secondary. We've also started to think about what the pipeline could look like for older resident leaders as well. And then there's another piece of this work, which is really around the career portal that would give access to career and access to community development career information, and allow organizations and post-secondary education entities to interact with it. Our work has really been focused on the first goal. So what we've done is we've taken curriculums that our organizations have developed and or are using, and we have created one larger curriculum that covers that age range that I just described. So middle school through high school and post-secondary. And we've brought together a consortium that includes Detroit Economic, sorry, not Detroit, sorry, DESC, and a number of higher ed institutions, Detroit Public Schools Community District, the Youth Development Resource Center has been involved, Challenge Detroit. So it's a multi, I don't want to say multi-sector, but it is of sorts a multi-sector group of folks coming together to really work through how we build out a really robust pipeline that both leads you to a successful community development career, but also is very supportive and equitable. So we've been looking at this work through an equity lens. So the competency framework is in part what we are trying to, well, with the curriculum, we're looking at the competency framework that was developed. And then we are also looking at because we want this to be able to be offered in schools. So we're aligning it with also the core curriculum standards of the state of Michigan so that it can be offered both in charter and public schools and traditional public schools like BECDD. We also created the curriculum so that it can be delivered by CDOs or it can be delivered by teachers, and we're still working through what that might look like. There are 3 community development certificate tracks that are about to launch. One at Wayne State University, one at Lawrence Tech University, and then we're looking at some possibilities with Henry Ford. And so some of the exciting things that we're working on right now are how do we create really robust post-secondary opportunities? And so, for example, an AmeriCorps program that you would be able to receive college credit. This would be beneficial for young people in the younger age range, but also for residents that have been hold on one moment. I'm sorry, my daughter really wants an orange. An orange. So the AmeriCorps program would also be beneficial for older residents and many of us know that there are residents in our community that are part of AmeriCorps programs, and we know, partly because of residents have talked about this and young people have talked about it, that the education award is hugely beneficial. And so we're looking at it for that reason, but also, is there a way to offer college credit so that you're earning college credit while you are serving in the neighborhood? So those conversations are happening with U of M Dearborn, Wayne State University, and Detroit Public Schools Community District. We're also talking about, for the high school age range, we're working through a process where young people can be dual enrolled in some of these certificate tracks that I just referenced. And then we also are going to launch a pilot in the summer of 2021 that will pilot the curriculum, and we're working with BECDD about placing this in a number of their schools as also a pilot. Maggie, am I at time? Am I at time?
You're good, Christine. You're good. You got
Okay.
a couple more minutes
right.
if you want to use them, or you can pass it off. Your choice.
I think I want to ask you, did I miss anything? What I will say, I just want to say this. There are exciting developments in this work every day. And so it feels like, and so we actually just had a really amazing conversation with DESC yesterday about some ways that maybe we can leverage current programs that are operating to get paid internships for college stage students, maybe even high school students, and then elder residents. So this is really, there's a lot of really wonderful things that are going on. And did I miss anything?
I
And
think
we have
you're
an
good.
amazing team.
I think you're good. Yeah, this is an amazing piece of work. You can see from the screen and from Christine's comments that there are many, many, many pieces to this, which probably makes it more complicated. On the other hand, what we keep learning is that with all these pieces, all these different institutions, people are poised. So our work seems to be to connect the dots more than have to invent new things. Although I do think the competency framework and the curricula that are being developed are really, really groundbreaking. So, all right. Christine,
There's a bunch of questions.
yeah, so we're going to come back to the questions. I'm hoping we'll get to the chat. Yeah. So Christine, thank you very much. We're now going to go to the System Capitalization Task Force, and I'm going to call on the two of the co-leaders of the task force, Jody Raines from the Herb Family Foundation, Chris Ewell from IFF, and then Melvin Henley from CDAM. So, Jody?
Great, thanks. And there's a third co-leader of this group, Sharita Smith from Grandmont Rosedale, that isn't with us today, but she's been helpful too. So yeah, there's been a lot of really exciting updates so far. We split our section up between 3 people, so maybe it'll kind of change the rhythm a little bit. There's a lot of information to absorb. So I think you've heard there's a lot of really great initiatives and projects, but I want to step back a little bit, and through this, just remind everyone what we're talking about is building a system here. So all these elements are weaving together in this kind of masterful system that we're trying to develop. And I'm not going to talk too much about that. Madhavi will talk a little bit later about the governance and some other stuff. But just keep in mind that all these pieces are building together. The goal is to build, like Maggie said in the beginning, this comprehensive network of representational organizations that will help assure equitable development in every neighborhood in the city of Detroit. So how do we resource that kind of a system? It's really ambitious. And Maggie mentioned too, resourcing, we have to raise money, but Maggie mentioned the volunteers and the people. This is a people-powered system too. It was one of the many things I was thinking about last night as I was trying to fall asleep, was all the hours that go into projects like this. And I work for a foundation, and we look at budgets and we make grants based on the budgets we get, but they just always underestimate. There's no way you can capture the actual people power that go into projects like this and what that costs. But that said, we do have to figure out how to raise money to resource the system. So we've had this task force meeting for a couple of years. We got state people, city people on it, funders, community development organizations, some of the finest consultants, in the community development industry helping us. And some of the initial research that was done shows that there's actually surprisingly fairly sufficient funding already happening out there for community development kind of writ large, but it needs to be better aligned to meet the needs of this system that we're building. We're really trying to pull everything together into a pretty efficient but robust system. So how do we align the funding to really resource this engine that we're building, the system that we're building? And then, of course, there's a funding gap to fill as well. So there's some additional money that we're going to need to bring in. And so building the engine of Detroit, building the engine of development in Detroit, I'm going to call it building the engine. We're really big on lists because there's a lot of stuff to be done. And we have 11 basic goals that we're working on as a task force. You can probably find them on the website. I'm not going to go through a list of 11 things because I know after like 3 things, people kind of start to glaze over. So I'm going to kind of bundle up and summarize what those goals are of what we're trying to fund. And then I'm going to turn it over to Chris Yule, who's going to highlight a few. And then Melvin Henley, who works for CDAM, is going to update you on a really exciting, some exciting potential legislation to create some new funding. So the basic goals that we're trying to resource are long-term multi-year funding for the backbone function of building the engine, which is going to be run through CDAD, and Madhavi will talk about that next or later. We want to get adequate funding for CDO operations and capacity using a strong equity lens and a council district model to assure residents in every part of the city are not just included, but actually are helping drive the change. And then also we need to get the funding for those specific project initiatives that you just heard about, like Neighborhood Voice and that amazing pipeline program. We've got short-term, medium, long-term goals, of course. We're looking at best practices from other cities and from Detroit. We got a lot of best practices in our city. So we're doing all that stuff. I think I just want to emphasize that, you know, repeat what I said, this is about more than just raising dollars. We're working to really change the mindset about what is community development in Detroit, and it recognize it as a holistic strategy to support all of Detroit neighborhoods. For example, our foundation supports a lot of environmental kind of initiatives. We've learned through this pandemic, you know, when you physically develop a healthy city, it requires good housing, but you also need healthy environments. You need green space, you need clean water, all that stuff. We need to bring together funders and others to align our goals and our funding. And we're gonna have a series of alignment forums kicking off soon to try to do that. We need to develop some new funding streams. Melvin's gonna talk about one. We're also looking at CRI, Community Reinvestment Act, and bank funding and stuff. And then we need to develop a system to track the funding. It's a big complex system. It's funny, we spend a lot of time talking about this stuff and we don't talk dollars. The dollar estimates we have right now are pretty, they're pretty rough. It's hard to figure out exactly what it costs, but we're talking about probably 120 million at least over 5 years to really adequately resource this system. And like I said, we have a lot of that in place. We need to fill some gaps and we need to align it, the existing funding streams. So that's kind of like a big high level picture. I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about some specific things that he as a CDFI, I think, is really interested in, and then Melvin will talk about the legislation.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. And there's a few things I just kind of wanted to click on here. One is, as Jody mentioned, this is a complex system, right? As dollars move through space. Over time in my career, I've worked from, at banks, I've worked at a foundation, I now work in the CDFI space. So spent a lot of time thinking about how money moves, but also moving money, right? And a lot of it is, as was mentioned, there's a lot of money flowing through this system, but is it flowing through in the right ways? And the way you structure capital incentivizes behaviors, both good and bad. So we're thinking about those things. And for instance, again, what, grants versus loans versus all different things, and how does that money move? So I think that that's a really important point. And as Jody mentioned, we've had, Garland and John and some of the other consultants working with us. We did our best to map the system of money coming in and where it was going, which is very, very complicated. And we looked at it both from the supply side, from the banks and CDFIs and foundations, as well as from the demand side, if you will, the CDO organizations. Both kind of what they're getting today, but in a perfect world, what do they need in order to be successful, not just for next year, but for the next 5, 10, 15 years, right? So a lot of what we're working on is that. And as Jody mentioned, the system capitalization work group has been meeting for a couple of years. And, there's, like all of these types of things, initially, you start moving slowly and then a lot of things start happening and you can see the tangible results of it. But one of the things that I think has come out of this system capitalization work group is just, I've found that just having these different voices coming from these different sectors in the room talking about this has immense value in its own right. And there's a lot of kind of hidden benefits to that, even as I think about how, I grow my team and how IFF works in Detroit, just, by connecting dots in this meeting. And so one of the things that we thought would be of value moving forward are these alignment forums to make sure that we're cross-talking these things. Because right now I do feel, and I've mentioned it to the team, I think on a sector by sector basis, for instance, CDFIs, foundations, CDOs, I think within those verticals are all working better than together than I've ever seen them in Detroit. It's pretty amazing how folks are aligning. What needs to happen more is that then those verticals kind of cross together and we're working together. And I would also add that, you know, I feel the city has been a wonderful partner, and it's been a much more effective working relationship than many of us have with the city with regards to community development that I've seen in my, you know, decade plus of doing this work in Detroit. So these alignment forums are kind of an attempt to continue this momentum and make sure, you know, that we're again cross-talking this and thinking about how these dollars move. And some of the things that we've been thinking about and talking about before I turn it over to Melvin is, you know, it's just so you guys are aware, and they won't, you know, some of them will be in these alignment forums and others may not, but, you know, we've been talking a lot about kind of that inherent tension of mission versus money, so to speak. Like if you have these CDOs working in a neighborhood that is a disinvested neighborhood, and they're geographically landlocked and they're trying to do projects that are appropriate for that neighborhood, a lot of times the funding community thinks that they need to do real estate projects and all of this, and eventually they get to financial sustainability and everything's good. Well, the reality is that's not the case, right? In order to get financial sustainability, you know, you got to go do some market rate stuff that's not appropriate in a neighborhood necessarily. And so there's an inherent tension there, and I think inherent misunderstanding of how CDOs work and what's necessary. So we really need to push on that. One of the things we've been talking about too is another tension of, as we look at this from a system level, do we create a bunch of vertically integrated CDOs that have their own real estate capability, or do we think about capabilities more at a system level and how CDOs can buy capability, so to speak, and partner with others versus all of them building it themselves? And so we haven't come to full answers on this, but again, think, you know, things we're thinking of. Other things that are really important and it's hard to, you know, monetize or, you know, to make tangible are, you know, CDOs don't really get a lot of funding for community engagement and don't get a lot of funding for advocacy. Yet these are two of the most important things that CDOs do. So again, as that funding is coming through, you know, how can we think of those things? I also think, and we've talked a lot about it, isn't just the dollar amount, it's the funding certainty and funding stability. You know, could foundations make 10-year commitments to CDOs so they at least have that certainty of what those dollar amounts are? Because I think a lot of times that's more important than the actual dollar amount, is that you have that certainty of revenue coming in on an annual basis, and then they can build a business around it. And also, you know, last but not least, I think, you know, a lot of times there's kind of a perception that this is a zero-sum game, right? If intermediary like a CDFI gets dollars, therefore it means a CDO there's harm done to a CDO because they're not getting that dollar. But is that true? You know, if I get a grant dollar at IFF, for every $1 grant I get, I can make $5 in loans. And so how do we, it's not an either or equation. To me, it's a how do we all work together to optimize those dollars that are out there. And so those are the things that again, we're working on. And I've been really excited, frankly, to see the progress that this system capitalization group has made. And then also, obviously, you know, all these other groups, and even just sitting here and hearing some new things today that I wasn't even fully aware of, which is pretty phenomenal. So with that, I want to turn over to Melvin, who's going to talk about some very exciting things with regards to Lansing.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris and Maggie and everyone else for being here on the call. As mentioned, my name is Melvin Henley. I work for an organization called CDAM. So we're the Community Economic Development Advocates of Michigan. And so through that, we are a membership-based organization that has over 200 plus members across the state of Michigan that's really focused on community economic development and a few different buckets of work. And so over the last about 18 months or so, we've been working alongside building the engine to put some thought to some of the problem areas that Chris has highlighted when it comes to getting things done related to small and medium-sized projects in communities themselves. And so what we did is we really put some thought to about what more could be done in this arena. And after we did a broad scan and kind of had conversations with a number of groups from throughout the nation, we settled on exploring what a community investment program may look like in the state of Michigan. We were inspired by 14 other states that have a similar program on the books and decided to explore this conversation forward. And so over the last about 18 months or so, we've actually been able to form a coalition with partners throughout the state of Michigan. We've been able to bring on a lobbyist as well to help explore and move this conversation forward. And we've actually been able to get a committee hearing on House Bill 5820 and then House Bill 5821, which in essence would form the Michigan Community Investment Pilot Program. And what that is it is a donor-based tax credit that would allow organizations, it's a donor-based tax credit that would allow a contribution to be made directly to a place-based organization. And in return, the donor, whether it be an individual or a corporation, will be able to get a 50% state tax credit. And what that means is that if our ask is that $25 million annually would be able to be contributed by individuals or corporation, and in return, $50 million will be made in new investment annually. And so our ask to Congress, or our ask is that through this pilot program, that it's a 5-year pilot program with the hopes of bringing in $250 million in additional support to locally place-based organizations. And with that, the thought is that communities know the problems that they're facing, and they also know how to solve them. And some of the areas that we had identified where nonprofits will be able to have an impact is around small business development, around affordable housing, around financial empowerment, around workforce attraction and retention, because we know that is can be a problem area as well. But then also neighborhood and community revitalization. And I think also, community corridor revitalization as well as a part of some of the impact areas that we've identified in ways that locally place-based organizations can build relationships with donors and then leverage those dollars to have an even greater impact on the community. So like I said, over the last 18 months, we've been able to get this coalition together. We've been actually able to have bills introduced, which is really great and not something that happens in this short time span, and even get a committee hearing secured, which is like phenomenal even in that time. So we had a committee hearing scheduled with the Housing, Commerce, and Tourism Committee back in September. Once you have bills introduced, you have to have 2 leads. We've got bipartisan support on these bills, which is really exciting. We've got Republican Aaron Miller, who represents the Sturgis area, as well as Republican Rodney Pearson, who is a Democrat from the Ypsi area, to be the lead sponsors on this bill. And so we had a committee hearing back in September, in which we were on the stand for about an hour and a half, kind of talking through all of the potentials, bringing in examples from other states, et cetera, and where they heard testimony. And then we were actually scheduled to have a vote take place on this issue this past Monday, but sadly that committee hearing got postponed to sometime next week, with the hopes that a vote can come. With the hopes that a vote can take place. We're hearing no major pushback, which is a really great sign when it comes to legislation. And so even with that vote taking place, like there's still a few other steps before it reaches the governor's desk, but it's definitely a huge accomplishment and a lot of interest in the bill up to this point, with some really exciting kind of things still to take place, but we're feeling positive what things are at the moment. And again, like we said, like Chris alluded to, as well as Jody talked about, that this program that we're talking about, which again is the Michigan Community Investment Pilot Program, is allowing local nonprofits a tool to attract investors and direct funds to respond to community needs, which they are aware of. And that can range from a lot of different things, which I talked about earlier. So we're excited for where that's going, as well as the potential impact, as well as the conversations that is starting to open when it comes to community development, the importance of it, and how tools are needed for nonprofits, as well as like smaller to medium-sized projects, which may not, be the headline in the newspaper, but will still have a large impact on the community.
Great, Melvin, thank you. Madhavi, we're going to bring you back, and we actually are running out of time if we want to have discussion. So I'm going to ask you to see how, how quickly you can run through the system governance piece. Go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. Me again. Talking about system governance. I'm going to keep it a bit quick. The Building the Engine Steering Committee has been working for the past year to try to figure out how to, for lack of a better word, sort of institutionalize all of the hard work that's been happening. I mean, Building the Engine is an initiative, not sort of a separate nonprofit that's designed to sort of live on in perpetuity. And Jody and everyone else on the call was sort of talking about all of this really important system building work, all of these kinds of projects and initiatives happening. And the big sort of question is how to make sure that's sustained after are satisfied that we've sort of built a system. And, CDAD is a 20-year-old membership organization with close to sort of 200 members. And the very, very earliest iterations of what would go on to be Building the Engine sort of started at CDAD and was known as system reform. And we are sort of, one of the three founding partners, as Maggie talked about very early on. And so it makes sense that some of this work lives inside of CDAD, and what that looks like and what are all of the nuances and complications of sort of transitioning this work into CDAD and having CDAD play sort of a host or a backbone function to this work. I'm sure you can imagine, based on all the good stuff you just heard, that is very complex and needs to be handled sort of very carefully. And so as a member of the Building the Engine Steering Committee and, the steering committee itself, the steering committee is working with CDAD to sort of figure out what this transition into CDAD will look like. And so we're working on all the things that would go into a memorandum of understanding, things like decision-making power, how does the body of work that CDAD does interact in a way that continues the spirit of alignment, with Building the Engine? How do we make sure that we're finishing off this thing that we call the CDO coverage process, which is really a way to figure out how does each council district in Detroit have access to community development coverage, work, expertise, tools, all of that stuff. And then trying to figure out what is the work plan for the next couple of months, both for finishing this transition into CDAD. We think and hope will be done by by April. I think, we have to give it the time that needs to make sure it happens properly. It's a very critical thing, I think, for the community development ecosystem to make sure we have this done properly. And then sort of talking about the goals for Building the Engine over the next couple of years. And Maggie, that's as short as I could make it. I don't know if I cut out too much, but that's as fast as I could go.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Madhavi. So what's next for Building the Engine? Really quickly, this year and next year, CDAD is working hard to prepare to act as the system backbone. Next year, the steering committee will transition the Building the Engine work into CDAD. We expect next year to launch the single family rehab pilot. Assuming that the resources come into play, there'll be the first 3 neighborhood tables as part of the Neighborhood Voice Project. We'll hopefully by the end of 2021 finish developing this district model so we can see how community development can be there for neighborhoods in every council district. We'll continue with the Neighborhood Vitality Pilot Project. And then, let's see, then by mid to late 2021, we'll be piloting some of those leadership pipeline pieces. We hope to launch the capacity building delivery system by late next year. You heard about the 10-year plan for system capitalization. That will be late next year. In the meantime, we hope to assemble all the resources necessary for implementation. By late 22, we hope for full implementation of the Neighborhood Vitality Index. By late 22, we hope to pass the state legislation. Believe it or not, sausage making takes a long time in the legislature. And finally, by the end of 2022, hopefully the work of building the engine will end and a full system will be in place. So that's the building the engine story. I know we've gotten lots of comments in the chat, and we've tried to respond to them. I know there was one comment from Tom Woodman about some cost sharing and whether the single family rehab model could also be applied to new construction. So I wanted to acknowledge that question, see if Kim or anyone else has a response to it. But I also want to see if anybody else on the call would like to chime in with any questions or comments. Lauren, can we unmute folks? Or Camille?
Yep.
All right. So anybody have any comments or questions that we have not already answered? Tom, we're going to get to yours in a sec. From Pat Bosch to everyone. A true labor of love. Thank you, Maggie and team. Okay, thank you, Pat. Good to see you. I want to say hey to June Kim from Lawrence Tech. June did an amazing amount of research. You'll find his study on our website. And Ben, thank you. You're saying it's very informative. I'm going to ask if we can, if we look at the chat, Tom Woodman, you had a comment and a question. You said, are there any pilots around new construction using the same approach, namely capacity building and using local resources for local construction? And has there been any discussion around a digital platform that would enable the participants to work together more effectively, like shared construction management, et cetera? Kim, I know you can respond, especially to the second question about shared costs.
So I don't know if this has been done locally, so that means I also don't know if it's been done with regard to new construction, but I would dare to guess that that some parts of what we're trying to do are replicable. One of the things that we're looking at now for the cohort model is systematizing all of, so because we're looking to use federal funding, that means that there, is a ton of, like we're gonna have to follow procurement regs and, all kinds of standards. And we don't want the community development organizations to have to figure out how to do all of those things alone. So we want to be able to create a manual. And we also want to kind of systematize the use of all of the systems. So that means everything from procurement, that construction management, all of the, what it means for the staff people that are working on this, some of their individual systems, spec writing, a whole host of processes that are either related to the house or related to HUD regs or related to the home buyer pipeline or a whole host of other things. We want to systematize that. And because we're going to be in this virtual workspace for the foreseeable future, we have talked about like what technology we might need to make all of that, to develop it and then make it accessible to the cohort electronically. I would assume that in doing that, and all of the reporting and learning and evaluation that we want to build into this, that there will be some kind of a leave behind for some best practices. So while I don't know what it looks like to do this with new construction, I would dare to guess that at least the cohort piece is probably replicable. We probably want to test it and make sure we're successful in the first place before we say that. But there are some things that we were able to test some of our assumptions and have some of our assumptions affirmed as to how we might go about organizing the cohort and some of the mixed methods that we want to bring into it. So.
Thanks, Kim. Any other questions or comments? All right.
Maggie, I just wanted to answer Phyllis's comment in the chat around the curriculum. The goal of the curriculum is to make it available to organizations, to churches for implementation. There's some things we're working through around quality, ensuring quality, and copywriting and those types of things. But the goal of it is that anybody will be able to use it and also pick different parts out of it that they want to use. So we want it to be really accessible to our to organizations and others.
Thanks, Chris. And I just wanted to say I appreciate that, because we have a lot of faith-based organizations in our communities, and they're critical to our communities, especially those of color. And so they do entertain a lot of youth programming, and they can certainly benefit from that. And if you have not included them as we talk about equity in those conversations, I would beseech you to do so sooner rather than later.
Christine, you're on mute.
Yeah, like I said, I'm sorry, because Emerson is making lots of noise. She's no nap Nancy today. So there's it has churches. I think what's been a part of the conversation is how do we make this accessible for as many people that want to use it, and how do we ensure that it's a best practice as it relates to youth development. So it's project-based. We're attaching youth employment and leveraging GDYT. So I think, and then we've also talked about, are there ways in which we can go and even train staff on some of the staff of other organizations on the curriculum, so that they can use it. So, and we haven't identified who's in and who's out. So, but I appreciate, Phyllis, your reminder that we should definitely talk about. We should definitely make sure that we're making it accessible for churches.
Great. Thanks, Christine. So it's 3 o'clock. We don't want to overuse your time, but I want to just take a minute to really thank those of you who presented. So Kimberly, Madhavi, Melvin, Christine, Chris, Jody, and Erica. Could we get something, some snaps or some applause for the presenters? Yay! And I just want you all to know that this is just a fraction of the people who have been at the Building the Engine table working since 2016. So it really has been an amazing process, amazing committed people and organizations. So we appreciate your feedback. We welcome it. We encourage you to go to the website, www.buildingtheengine.com. You'll find a lot of stuff, and you'll also get directed to our Facebook page where you can ask any question and we will make sure to respond. So anything else? Anyone else want to add anything? Nope. All right. Thank you all very, very much. And we hope to see you at the summit in 1 hour. It's going to be really good. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.